Hello, I wanted to show you the latest group of figures to come off of the production line. These are Mexican Revolution federales from Outpost Wargames services, and it's a slightly obscure conflict to wargame, but I tend to find myself attracted to that kind of thing. I read or see a film or a TV documentary on a particular military conflict, and then always like to kind of explore excuse me, its wargaming potential. And I've been interested in the Mexican Revolution for quite some time now, and these figures from Outpost I actually purchased about 4 years ago. Not just these, but a whole mountain of lead. They've got a very comprehensive range for the Mexican Revolution, and since I purchased them, another company called Gringo Forties, who seem to specialise in everything sort of middle American, have started to bring out a range of figures for the Mexican Revolution, but it's a bit of a limited range at the moment. But to be fair to Gringos, I think the quality of their sculpting is slightly better than a lot better than Outpost. But Outpost win on in terms of the comprehensive nature of their range. And as I say, I enjoy wargaming obscure conflicts. I've got an interest in a lot of periods that I'll no doubt produce videos on in the future. The things that interest me about the Mexican Revolution are, one, that the figures are interesting to paint. Although these are, I've started with a batch of white uniformed federales. There's a lot of colour, especially in in some of Pancho Villa's cavalry and so on, with the white sombrero hats and so on, and coloured blanket rolls and what have you. So you can put a lot of character into the figures with the painting. I've enjoyed what I've read and found out about the Mexican Revolution. It's not something that is widely studied in the UK. It's certainly not taught as part of the history syllabus at schools and so on, but I'm sure it's probably got a sort of higher profile in America and South America, obviously. But it's a fascinating conflict, and when you think about it, in the 20th century there was the Russian Revolution and the Chinese Revolution, and the Mexican Revolution was a major social upheaval, and it's probably about the third most important revolution in the history of the 20th century, and yet here in the UK we tend to ignore its history. I've read quite a lot about it now. The books I can recommend, this is a very good one, Villa and Zapata, the biography of the Mexican Revolution by Frank McLean. Really well written, lots of sort of good narrative style, and goes into the sort of social and economic factors, the political factors as well, obviously, behind the Mexican Revolution. There was an American book called The Wind That Swept Mexico that was published in the 1940s, in the middle of the Second World War. And this is a new edition of it, but this is a really interesting book to purchase. It's nearly all photographs, but it gives you a lot of ideas of how to paint figures of uniforms. Unfortunately, obviously, it's all in black and white. There's also a video that's worth watching on YouTube. This book was famous as the title is a well-known title to refer to the history of the Mexican Revolution, the wind that swept Mexico. But if you look up the storm that swept Mexico on YouTube, you'll find a 2-hour documentary that's free to view on YouTube, which is full of useful information. There's another video, a film that was made some years ago, called and starring Pancho Villa as himself, because Pancho Villa actually gave his permission to be filmed by some Hollywood filmmakers, because he was a bit of a folk hero. So there's actually a sort of a very old black and white Charlie Chaplin-esque kind of film footage of him, but in more recent years a film was made on the subject of the film being made, if that makes sense, and there are some quite good battle scenes and so on in it, so that's worth keeping an eye out for as well. Now, I did wonder for quite a long time what rules I was going to use when playing war games, and I finally settled on black powder. At first glance, you would imagine that there's a lot of skirmish type fighting, but in fact there were a lot of full-on battles during the Mexican Revolution. And I've seen it suggested that in fact it was a very sort of similar conflict to the Boer War, which happened only 10 years earlier. And as the Boer War has been played using black powder, I thought I'd settle on black powder, because that is one of my favourite sets of rules. So I based the figures up in groups of 4 on 40 millimetre square bases, and what I've painted so far, it's a small step in a long journey. I've got 2 units of federales and 3 command stands. The sort of differences with the Boer War, there were some aircraft. I believe it was the first conflict where an aircraft was ever used to spot. It certainly wasn't used in an aggressive way, to drop bombs or to machine gun or anything like that, but aircraft were used in spotting. There was a great deal of use of trains to transport troops, so that makes it very similar to the Boer War in a way. On one side you've got sort of very mobile cavalry forces that can dismount and have got a lot of skills and accuracy with their rifles and so on, and on the other side you've got a more static kind of slow moving trained army, only they weren't terribly well disciplined. The federales, very badly paid, very poorly equipped, so not up to the standard of the British Army, but you have got that kind of same conflict of immobile versus highly mobile armies. One of the big differences, I said that the trains were used, but one of the revolutionary commanders actually devised a method of packing trains full of dynamite and then just releasing them along the railway line so that they detonated as they passed the federal garrisons and just tore towns to bits. After which he would then ride into town and mop up the survivors. I'm not quite sure how you'd simulate that in a war game, other than perhaps to have a game that took place following the explosion. What else? Right, the figures themselves, as I said earlier, they're not brilliant castings. The faces on them in particular are a little bit clumsy, I think, and one of the things, these are meant to be federales wearing capes. Now, if I show you an illustration, there is an Osprey publication to give you some hints on how to paint the figures and the kind of uniforms that they wore. But there's a group of federales there wearing these capes. Not sure how well that'll turn out on camera, but the kepi is called a saumur kepi. It's based on a sort of French style, and for one thing, you can see there. I hope you can see that the top is indented. There's another good. Oh, you can't see the indentation in the kepi here, but there's an indentation in the top, and unfortunately these figures have a completely flat surface to the top of their kepis. And the other thing that was striking about the kepis was that the rear was taller than the front, so that there was a noticeable slant on the kepi, a downward slant, and these are sort of more or less horizontal. So they haven't done a very good job on the kepis. And I piped them red. I've painted them so that they have red piping, but which is how this one appears. But I was at a loss to know what to put on top. Whether some of the sort of continental designs have a sort of knot type arrangement on the top of the kepi, but I did find on the web some that were blank, and as I wasn't terribly happy about that flat surface on the top anyway, I didn't want to sort of go overboard and try to paint knots onto something that wasn't realistic anyway, so I just left them blank, and I think they've turned out pretty well. So my next step is really to carry on painting. It's probably going to take me years, it always does, to bring these things to fruition, but I think I'm going to probably go for some mounted villistas next, paint those up and have a bit of fun with the sombreros and so on. I used on a few of the bases, but particularly on this command stand here, is a mounted commander with an NCO, and I put on this cactus as well, and I've put a few smaller ones onto some of the other bases. There's one on that command base there, another one on this command base here. So I've made use of those. They came from a company called the Museum Models Collection, and I bought these a long time ago, so I can't for the life of me remember where I got them online, but they're produced by Pegasus Hobbies, and there are two boxes of them, Cactus Box 1 and Cactus Box 2, and one box is the larger ones. I believe it's Cactus 1 has the larger ones, but the smaller ones you could actually use in a smaller scale, so if you wanted them for 15mm or something like that. But they do as kind of one cacti that are just beginning to sprout or something like that. There's a little one you might be able to see there. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, I painted them though, because they come in a very sort of, this is the way I've painted them up, but they do come in a kind of very sort of virulent, plain plastic green colour, which looked a little bit artificial, extremely artificial, so I thought I ought to give them a more kind of glaucous green kind of appearance and highlight them a little bit to bring out the spikes and so on them. But I found painting them, they're coated in some amazing kind of surface substance that you really have to make sure you wash off. Otherwise it just completely repels the paint. So they need a good wash in warm soapy water. That actually turns green, so heaven knows what they coated them with. But once you've got that off, you can prime them, and the paint then takes quite a while. So what I'm going to do is as usual, I'll produce some close-up footage of the figures so that you can see the detail on them a little bit better. As I say, it's not brilliant detail, but I'm looking forward to getting a couple of armies together for this conflict and playing a game of it. It's something out of the ordinary. So thanks for watching, and I'll tack onto the end of this video. I'll tack on some close-up video shots and then some stills, so you can take a close look at it. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next video. Bye for now.